Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. So we are starting the afternoon, evening session. You know that this morning we talked about the need. Okay, let's resume. Our Trobades, could you please close the doors? Thanks. As I said, this morning we talked about the need to change the way we look, to avoid building separation walls and barriers, and undoubtedly the need to preserve freedom of thought, freedom to reflect. And this is the main requirement, what we've asked our two speakers, Ms. Laura Fernández and Antonio Molina. Good afternoon, everybody. Once again, 1 year. After a year, I feel privileged for having, the possibility to attend. This is such an important festival. This is a micro-resistance space that embraces us all. So I have the pleasure to share with Antonio Muñoz Molina this roundtable on neither fear nor hate. So when I first read this title, the first image that came to my mind was, handheld devices, social media. We've just come out of pandemia that has so much to do with Albert Camus' plague, La Peste. So we will speak a lot about the state of siege. And I will tell you later on why we chose this title, neither fear nor hate. So currently, through virtual life, through social media, which indeed provide many advantages, but also they exert control on us. So they are both a chance and opportunity to tell things, to tell the stories, and a hindrance. But we have the opportunity of having people, living in the other corner of the world, reading what you've written. So they offer a lot of potential. And of course, they can be quite perverse because they are an abstraction, and as such, for Camus, it was something terrible, and that rose suspicion. So when I read this title, so the idea of social media came to my mind, and as a creator, I came back to the state of siege work, and I'll read a sentence aloud. This work was conceived and thought by the director Jean-Louis Porrot in 1941. He thought that he wanted to stage a show around the idea of the plague, La Peste, and mainly focused on Daniel Defoe's diary about the plague. He thought it made sense. So when he was, chatting with Camus, he proposed him to take part in or to participate in writing the screen, and Camus replied that he was writing a book on that. So he decided not to provide support and assistance, but to write a book on his own. And I very much encourage you to read this book. It's a formal experiment. In the theater play, there is a chorus. So in stage terms, he makes use of all available resources. So he defines it as such a formal experiment to tackle the topic of totalitarianism, where we have this character, Diego, etc. So the year of the premiere, that was 1948, that was an important year for Camus, not only because that was the year he discovered Simon Gray, but he was 35 years old at that time. He had already published The Plague in 1947, so he became a member of the libertarian movement, and he started to publish. And to me, he decided to put some distance with the Parisian intelligentsia. So he, decided to break away from that as a free man. So this is more or less the time where he premiered the state of siege. So the full sentence is pronounced by Diego, the condemned man, when he says neither fear nor hate. He decides to sacrifice. So the full sentence is neither fear nor fate. This is our victory. And to me, this sentence in Camus's words, the character not only speaks about a rupture with the status quo. He's not breaking away with the status quo at that time. In the society of the time, the governor says, well, there is one part of the society that are really conservative. There is a comet that appears in the sky, and they deny its existence. There are people that are getting ill, and they deny the plague. You know, all that environment that is so close to us nowadays, fake news and everything that, you know, that we read on our handheld devices, on our mobile phones, that this is a rupture with any type of organization that annihilates or ends up with freedoms. Camus was against ideologies and abstractions. Nowadays we're living in a constant abstraction, a really fearful, threatening abstraction. And that is, if you allow me, that will be my starting point of my talk with Antonia. Both as creators will explain how we relate to Camus's work. And I feel myself as a Camusian writer, because Camus spoke about human beings, men and women, outside the world, outside of any type of system. So in my case, in my works, I also use clichés that are fully recognizable, but at the same time I fully isolate the individual from the world. The word is a mechanism that engulfs the individual, that is constantly trying to eat up, to engulf the individual, despite the interior world. So I wanted to ask you, Antonio, what is for you this revelry, this rebellion by Camus, when we are sieged by so many different worlds that are competing to interpolate us, and they are trying to steal us, rob us from our consciousness. So everything is speeding up, and in this momentum, in this frantic times, this is like a flee towards not thinking. But I think it would be a good idea to sit down to think, to stop to think and reflect. I'm very happy. First of all, I would like to say that I'm really glad to be here. I heard things that moved me and opened my perspective. Somebody this morning wondered what would be the outcome of the results of art on artistic creation. Indeed, speaking about Camus and about my own personal case, when you write down in solitude, so you are on your own, and time goes by, and when you reread what you wrote, you see that people will read your work once you are dead, or people you never thought about, never would have thought that they would be influenced by your idea, this tormented idea about what is art for. Art has the capacity to change the world. So poetry, gives rise to things, indeed. When I was 15 years old, 17 years old, and I was awakening to conscience, to political consciousness, to anti-Franco awareness, Camus for me was a lesson and an example that confirmed that urge to rebel, to go against the prevailing system. And on the other hand, there was a further benefit. It was an even deeper rebellion against this opponent that was clear, dictatorship, but also rebellion about more concealed enemies or adversaries. At that time, in my youth, at Camus's time, and when I was a university student, it was there, and also constant coercion to impose something that apparently is indisputable, that cannot be confronted, because they were the laws of history in his time. When Camus, when opposing Sartre, he rejects Stalinism, because Sartre says these are the laws of history. You cannot do anything. There is no way out. The same way as they are telling us that the AI is here to stay. These are the new laws. But we confront and say these are moves on laws stated by large corporations. So I was a teenager. There were forms to rebel. And I was supposed to agree with people around me, but I didn't. And because I felt an urge to rebel, I loved to read Borges and Proust. And my colleagues, my students, I identified myself with them ideologically. They said that Proust was decadent, or Borges could be, because the idea of literature that we were supposed to have was combative, fully engaged, visibly committed politically, either that or a fully experimental literature. So these were the two options, or the two paths you had to follow. You couldn't opt for anything else. I felt a sense of belonging. I felt I belonged to the left-wing movement. I still do, of course. So on behalf of the left, we had to accept things that were unacceptable in the names of ideas or values such as justice, equality, and so on and so forth. So that critical thinking, that critical spirit, and that inner rebellion, that was uncomfortable to me, because it put me against my students, my colleagues, my friends. So that demand of freedom of spirit, this claim to freely act and feel and express yourself against what seems the inevitable laws of the world. So I just claimed and vindicated my right to be on my own, to say no, to defend justice, and at the same time not to accept any restriction, any limits to freedom of people. But Camus, that put a great toll on him, on his state of mood, on his life, and that put an end to his life. When he read his Nobel Prize speech, he was crushed. He was absolutely overwhelmed. He felt so much anguish with the Algerian situation, this solitude, this feeling, isolated in this free spirit, and we need to claim and defend that, because there are other ways of domination, of submissiveness, that are even more powerful. We are not somehow we are not allowed to go against. So, but we need to remind ourselves that we have the right to be free and independent, and act on our own. Yes, that resonates on me. This is a mantra, neither hate nor fear. We shouldn't be afraid of being hostile, to raise our voices, to say something nobody expects from you. So writers have their experience, their reading, their writings, and the way they decide to put distance with the mass. Right now, masses are polarized. There is a great dichotomy. There is a great deal of aggression. And I have the feeling, the impression that small bubbles or small masses are created with different waves and streams. And I see that there is not a physical perception or feeling by intellectuals that decide to raise their voices over so much noise. Whenever I read Camus, I have the feeling that he encapsulates many, many voices. And that's a great thing, to have as many voices as possible. So nowadays, the fact that mass media are a loudspeaker to things that exist, whereas others are fake news, they are things that do not exist at all. They are just a fog covering truth. So we should raise our voices. People, I mean, the ordinary person or citizen might feel, afraid. But we have to be courageous, be brave, and raise our voices amongst those crowds. This morning, our colleagues said that when Camus decided to act and become an intellectual, to publish on the press, everybody looked up at him. Nowadays, he would have chosen the mass media. Both Antonio and myself write for the same newspaper. And of course, the written press has an impact, but less and less so. Especially on youngsters, people do not read the newspapers, the written press any longer. So they tend to read the media. So it's our urge to raise awareness of people is more and more difficult to attain. That goal is more difficult to attain. And the writer is even, feels even lonelier. Do you agree with that? Just think that solitude, that loneliness was always really powerful.
I remember in the 90s, before the internet and so on, I sometimes, at the time, I wrote with greater odyssey than now. And I used to write about uncomfortable topics. I knew I was risking a bit when I wrote those articles. And the force of hatred was not inferior, it was not lower. It was just the same. And you could feel also bullied and alone, just as you feel today, harassed like today. And that's something that happened to me at the time, without no fear, no hate, nor hate, neither fear nor hate. But it's not about not having fear at all, not feeling fear. Is once you are aware of the fact that you are feeling fear, you can say, okay, I'll overcome that, and in spite of that, I will say what I think. And then, of course, there's the temptation of hate. Who doesn't have it? Whoever has been persecuted or crushed will feel that temptation. And you know what helps me maintain a healthy spirit? It is to think about people who I admire but that have worked in really very bad conditions, worse than the ones we can imagine. Montaigne, for example, he's inventing modern irony, tolerance. Montaigne invented it all in the middle of the war of religions in France. And Montaigne is not just someone in the castle with his library and all that. No, the castle was surrounded by bands of assassins, killers that were going to kill him on behalf of Catholicism or of whatever religion. And he founded this modern style in the middle of intolerance and persecution. Emily Dickinson is another extraordinary figure for me. A lady, you may think she's not participative at all, but the thing is that she was immersed in a small village and she wrote a poem where it goes, others celebrate Saturdays going to Mass. I celebrated stayed at home. So we're talking about an ultra-religious community where people, she says, some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep the Sabbath staying at home. It's a very modest declaration, statement, right? Vasily Grossman, Mandelstam, Anachmatovan, all these people, they all practice their freedom in terrible conditions. Simone Weil is one of Camus' models, a very strange woman, bizarre woman, very irritating even for those who love her. She's writing a manifesto that is called L'Enracinement, and she wrote it during the First World War, and this was a project that she had been commissioned to write, imagining France after the liberation, and it is a radical text, and we therefore cannot complain. Of course, yes, we are going to suffer, and we are entitled to feel the injury and complain about it, but at the same time we must be very aware of the fact that others have suffered much more than we do, and that we have to do what we're doing, because this is what we know how to do. Camus says que chacun fasse son métier. Each one should exercise their profession. We can all declare ourselves in favor of the greatest or biggest utopia and the best of ideals, but okay, he says, yes, fine, but let's turn this into a concrete thing and turn it into something specific. And this is something I learned from him, from Orwell and Simone Weil. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that before going to Sweden to receive the Nobel Prize, I saw that Camus asked the parents of Simone Weil to the permission to go to the house and spend some time there, because he was already very afraid at the time. He was feeling a lot of fear because everything was very hostile in France. So as a writer, it's terrible if the greatest of your fears is the fear you feel with regards to your own colleagues, because Alejandro Zambas says that one writes to belong, and once you know very clearly what your place in the world is, and you write to belong in order to have this belonging, but then the place you belong to that gives you the back, that's not true. No. Writer as a group, that is not true. No, I'm talking about writing by itself, not writers. But for me, it's like the trend of those who discovered that the imagined life is superior to the real one. Well, today we've talked about culture and so on, literature. The problem is that sharing our love for literature or culture does not guarantee anything. This means nothing is guaranteed. So we believe that education or culture will make us better, but perhaps that's not the case. And this is why we should keep a very critical attitude. We're not closer to someone because apparently we share our hobby for literature or our interest for literature. Perhaps you're not a better person just because you have a bigger culture. Just think about the number of terrible devils that had an extraordinary education. When we think about ideological fanaticism, we think it's related to ignorance and so on, but that's not true. The great philosopher, the abstraction, the philosophical systems and everything, I feel some sort of distrust for this. One of the most intelligent minds in the 20th century was Heidegger, who talked about he talked about the beauty of the hands of the Führer. He said that to someone, did you pay attention to the beauty of the Führer's hands. So you see the high commanders of the SS, they were not ignorant. Mengele, he was liked Schubert very much. The sad truth is that culture does not guarantee anything at all. Orwell and Smallway are going to the specific, the concrete, to have an anchor there. In the 80s, many people had theories about the workers' class and the liberalization. And Simone Wells was the only one to go to a plant, to an actual factory. And the official left elite, well, we see an element that is related to class. Camus did not belong to bourgeoisie. He was a member of the resistance, but truly a true member of the resistance. But others were just, you know, around it and working on theories and so on. When Paris was liberated, some were spending their holidays on the beach, and they had to hide that. So we need to think about these concrete, specific factors, because otherwise we're lost. So I insist, words can be used for anything, but you can only focus on the concrete things, not what people say, but what they do. And in this sense, feminism and the ecologic movement, the environmentalist movement have helped us a lot to understand that, because feminism, if you're an environmentalist in the abstract level, theoretical environmentalist, that's nothing. This has to be a practical behavior, and feminism, that's the same thing. I belong to a generation where we did a lot of theoretical statements, a lot of verbal radicalism. They were very radical in their words, but then in the practice, they were disconsiderate with women or with their own wife, or they would be abusing an employee or whatever. So I believe that we really have to focus on what is specific, on concrete things. Like when you leave your hotel room, is it all dirty? So that the clean ladies are going to have to face a terrible room or not? Like Paul Valéry said, the professions that drive you crazy. And sometimes we're all at risk of forgetting that the world is there and that the theory and practice should coincide, and they don't always. Camus could felt alone, but, well, many authors, sometimes you feel them that they're very much in the same line as you, or that you would have liked meeting them because you have the feeling that they thought just like you. And Camus regretted not having met Orwell, and Camus told Maria Casares in one of his letters, Orwell has died, bad news, and he's an extraordinary writer with the same experience as me, exactly the same, although he's 10 years older, and he's one of the few men with whom I truly shared. So they both understood that totalitarian mindset requires you to accept that truth is coming from ideology, but his commitment was with the truth of facts, so everything that is specific, concrete. And Orwell's idea that for him was an essential figure, I think it was also important for you, right? Well, it is difficult for us to truly understand the fact that during many years some things were difficult to understand. Some things were not accepted that we now accept naturally. In the 30s, for example, always said that in the 30s it was believed that you could be anti-fascist without being anti-totalitarian. And at the time, they were alone, because anti-fascism hides everything. It hides lots of things. And after the Second World War, when new information and testimonies start arriving from the Gulag and what was going on in the Soviet Union, the left, the whole left movement was blocked. There was a block in the left, and everything was ignored. And when Weimar arrived to France and he published his testimony, Margaret Neumann-Boyman, where she explained that she had been in the Gulag and then in Ravensbrück, prisoner of Hitler and Stalin. That's the title of the book. And it's something that has to be hidden in the name of justice and equality. And barbarity has to be hidden. And Camus and Orwell are saying that men cannot be killed on behalf of or under the name of justice or freedom or whatever. And that should not be accepted. In Spain, the culture, anti-fascist, anti-Franco, well, there was the Communist Party was the most dominant one, and we had prejudices, right? In 1976, Solzhenitsyn came to Spain, and he's a very important writer. A very important writer that who's now dead. He then wrote an article saying that the biggest mistake of the Soviet Union was allowing figures such as him getting out to get out of prison. So, in the name of a cause which is the greatest possible, which is freedom and justice, people have been oppressed and silenced. And why? Because it's uncomfortable for you to have people killing in the name of the Aryan race, or, well, okay, but in the name of freedom and social justice, well, then otherwise the ideologies will convince you that this is to be considered as an objective need of history or necessity of history. Well, yesterday we were talking about the notebooks and that Camus was sort of freer, right? And you wanted to read an abstract, right? I didn't find it. An excerpt, a quotation from Tchaikovsky. So Camus copies an excerpt from Chekhov's letter, and he says, the human body, that is what I'm concerned with, its health, that there's no pain, no suffering, the freedom of that body, of that specific being. That's what I'm really concerned about. And this brings me to someone else that belongs to this family of acknowledgement, Vasily Grossman, in Life and Destiny, where he says, there's a character that says, I only believe in Chekhov's democracy, and it consists of this basic idea, a human being is sacred, and when, well, the existence of the human being, that's the specific one, that's it. You can say, well, if you can suppress that, if you can, well, killing 60 people to make sure that 60 million will be fine, that's enough. But no, it's something that cannot be ignored. It's very important. Human beings may not be destroyed in the name of anything. Yesterday, during the traumatized reading of the Just Assassins, well, it was precisely about that, whether to kill the Duke or not, with the children there, whether Russian children could be saved, and so on. So today, going back to this idea of no fear, neither fear nor hate, today, with the social media and what the world is turning into, and what I was saying earlier, that it is not easy to raise our voices. You, as a writer, I don't know, me as an author, I have the feeling that the only form of resistance is an intimate one, and it only has sense through books, because they will be there later on. The controversies could be longer because they stayed longer in the newspapers. Now we have the impression that everything lasts only for 48 hours. The thinking capacity seems to be really minimal, and the only thing that could stop time a little bit, or slow it down at least, so that we can have the opportunity to explain what we want to tell things, what we want to, I don't know. When we write and create, we try to explain the world and try to improve it in some way or another, and we do that through the books. I have the feeling that's the only way we can do that, because the articles in newspapers, I don't know, I don't have the impression that helps, because either sometimes they may generate a lot of thought, but in general, no. And the books, it's like the state of siege, the dramatized reading yesterday. This is something that will stop the world for a minute and will make you think for a while and bring you out of your context in which you live. And as a creator, this is what I find most fascinating in Camus, because it's like Kafka. They're so modern that they will never age. The fact of thinking about human beings beyond nationalities and everything else. And here the whole action takes place in Cádiz, and whether he's speaking, in spite of the fact that he's speaking about specific particular things, he's talking about human beings. And that's going to be permanent, that will stay. And this is my ambition as a writer, as an author. I try to focus on the possibilities, potentialities of human beings more than the context.
Fully agree with what you have just said. And that is something we do with everything that is at our disposal with our best arms. Whenever you create a work of art, in this case a literary work, something interesting happens. We can only control it partially. To some extent, our consciousness is not the main element or the main factor when writing, because sometimes you abandon yourselves and you reach some findings beyond what you control. There is always a part that is not under your control. A work of art needs to be free of the outer world and also from your own ideas as an author, as a creator. Fernando Pessoa said something I always liked. All our opinions belong to others. Yeah, exactly. Our opinions are just trivial. So intelligence is quite unequal. We can be very smart, very intelligent and really dumb in other fields of life. And we can be both things at the same time. So sometimes our works have meanings. The author is not aware of. Balzac was monarchic, So his novels reveal just the opposite of what he proposed or defended. They show the triumph of bourgeoisie, the arrival and emergence of the new world, despite his support for the monarchy as a system. So, of course, we exert our liberty, our freedom as creators. We all need to have that freedom, this inner freedom of wishing, of desiring, of creating. This morning we spoke about brotherhood, fraternity, sharing with others. Over the pandemic, the confinement, I thought that from the three words of the French Revolution, the first one, freedom and equality, we theorized a lot, but we haven't reflected at all about fraternity. That is the third pillar. Without fraternity, without brotherhood or sisterhood, we cannot expect freedom or equality to be a reality, to materialize. So I modestly can say that your work, it contains your most intimate reality, but it also is deeply intertwined with fraternity. It depends from others to exist, and we need others to uphold us, because each of us needs to do what we are best at. This morning, the filmmaker Sisako spoke about his project of a forest of 100 trees on a desert area. And he and his family are, determined to save that forest. So we all need to cultivate and to grow our orchard, our garden, and put in all our senses. In the past, when I was young, I put my 5 senses on what I wrote and much less on my relationship with the outer world. So that is how I was in the past. I was really patient and courteous and very, conscientious and thorough about my work, and I neglected people around me, maybe because I justified it because of love to literature, and that is nonsense. Nothing justifies it. So this idea of a genius on itself, this literary genius. So I agree with you. And we are hopeful to find other people that think likewise. We can recognize ourselves in the face of others. So in my life, apart from my hat as a writer, I try to live personally in a dignified way, in the Buddhist sense of the word, to not to harm people, not to create wounds, not to hurt. I don't want to cause suffering, and that is even more important, or as important, as engaging yourself politically, doing civic things, and writing great novels. So the ethical values go hand in hand on the page and in your everyday actions, in your public image. So we share with Camus this idea of the invincible summer. So we all, believe a lot about this invincible or unbeatable summer. The fact that when the ideas of us as child, we are very close to our image as children, and we reflect on that. And that is why we want to cause the least harm to people. So this humanistic idea by Camus that I fervently share. So he was profoundly humanistic, a humanist. The only thing I can do in this world is to offer my writing, my work, to convey the feeling of human beings that exist and that are not seen. Some in the face of this noise, the fog, everything that is covered, this concealed idea, so that we are submissive. And it terrifies me indeed, thinking about future generations. They didn't have space to think, to reflect. Youngsters, they have no space. They need to, they ask them to focus their attention on different things all the time. So we somehow grew the habit of reflecting, but youngsters are born in this multitasking world where there is no time to sit and reflect, to sit in silence. So this, I have the idea of this fact of feeling unbeatable, invincible as a writer. This is not perceived nor believed by younger generations. There is the very same idea of servitude or gratitude is entrenched on us as writers, with our goal, our roles. So we want to have right to enjoy life at its full for a whole summer, feeling invincible, unbeatable. So there's this man that travels to Italy and enjoys, eating good food, drinking superb wine, and spend hours sitting on a terrace. And he says at one time, I only ask for one thing and do it very humbly, being aware that it will be difficult to attain it. I want to be read, with focus, with attention. So this hobby of literature, the fact that we like to write and read, has to do with resistance, with the concept of resistance. Even more so, and among young people, there will be radical dissidents emerging from this, crap world we are living on. I'm not at war against, because this is the trap of hate. I'm not against progress. I'm not at war with progress. I'm at war against a system, an economic system, production-based system that leads human beings to become absolutely slaves. I have a Kindle, an e-book, where for some times, from years, I kept Ian Fleming's novels, James Bond, the character. So not many people are reading them nowadays, but they are very well written and very cynical. And he had no regard whatsoever about how people would perceive him. This maleness attains the highest degree of maleness, of masculinity. When I read those novels, well, I needed to read them for something that I was writing, so I bought them. I bought this set of novels, and they are very well written, as I said. So it turns out that Amazon modified, changed the novels. In my own Kindle, those novels have been censored to remove offensive terms. I know who Ian Fleming was. He was a racist. He was, I know that information, but I'm capable enough. He was a male chauvinist, but I'm mature enough to be to remove that idea of his, that concept of his person and detach it from the writer. So Erasmus just read without the mediation of the clerical system, without the church intervening there. He wanted to be the sole interpreter of his readings. So we give our intimacy for free to our readers. We give them our most intimate likings and data to those horrible people at Amazon and others to do whatever they like with works, and we need to create resistance. We don't want to be dominated by this. We don't want to be subjected to this, to be submissive. Reading implies this sacred solitude. I don't need to share my life continuously with others. I want to be on my own, to spend time with myself and nobody else. So, because we need to revolt against that, because it's foolish and without any complex. That doesn't mean I'm obsolete. The trap is that we are on our own all the time. We are on our own in front of the screen, and you are sharing with some other people that are not there. So those traps are doubly perverse. This is, you are on your own. You are lonely, but at the same time, you are devising new ways of staying in contact with others that are not physical, that are not present. So I agree with you that we need to act radically to subvert the system, to revolt against it. We accepted that the mobile phone is an external brain that goes with us, and we need to, to end with that. Future generations will decide to completely put an end to this. I spent years living in New York, and I remember one day I went to a Starbucks coffee shop, and I sat down to write down with a notebook, and I felt completely anachronic. I felt absolutely obsolete in New York, writing on, handed, with a pencil and on a piece of paper and reading a paper book. But I feel proud of that nowadays, because oftentimes even those things that seem anachronical, they are not part of the past, but the future. Bicycles, trams, well, they are coming back, electric trams or e-bikes. So they became out-fashioned in the mid-1950s, and they are back now. So they were anachronic because they were a part of the future. So we'll end up with this idea, and I wanted to open the floor to the audience. We have 10 minutes left, so if any of you wanted to make a remark, share some thoughts or ask questions, this is the right time to do so. With a hand microphone, please, so that the interpreters can translate, can hear the question in the booth and interpret. First of all, I would like to thank you for being so close, so nice, so understanding, and so human. It's been a pleasure listening to you. You mentioned AI, whether there will be young people that will they be there? There are many people that are outside the networks, outside the media, and not only young people, but older people. And on the other way around, there are old people that are completely hooked and addicted to social media. So it's not only the youngsters. Of course, we need to reflect on that, on the threat of AI. I work with deaf people and deaf and blind people, and the GPT board helps them a lot. So technology in itself, has its benefits too. I recently read an article that stated that youngsters want to be able to learn any longer because they do their essays and their homework with GPT. They learn to express themselves in different ways. So they cannot just, to use something as such. They have to modify it. So there are positive things. My grandmother didn't read books, neither did my mother. A lot of people over 60s here in Spain never went to school, let alone, even less university. People read much more nowadays. Maybe they are reading crap, but so was the case in the past. You wrote an article some time ago where you spoke about the BRICS you know, the brick and mortar, the fundamentals or the foundations of literature. I was young at that time, so it is true that we had to read many boring books at school, and of course our teachers forced us to read horrible books, and nobody felt the urge to continue reading because they were absolutely crap. So you wrote that, Antonio, even though you don't remember that. So we also need to be optimistic, and you know, and maybe electricity will disappear and we will have to go back to centuries in time. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not a matter of being in favor or against technology. We need to go deeper and see who are the leaders, who is dominating, who are we subjected to. Because you can just get on the internet and check some articles on quantum physics, smart things. And trains are good both for transporting our commuters and for transporting people to concentration camps, to Auschwitz. So that depends on the uses you give to that technology. So that neglection, that reject of pessimism, no? The idea that those that will come after us will necessarily be worse than us, than our generation. Laura is younger than me. She's like, my children's age. She doesn't feel less passionate about literature. So, this younger generation is exactly the same or even better. Whenever we go and sign books, we draw our own statistics, and there are many female older readers, and many people that read you, regularly. And of course, this morning one of the participants mentioned that in his country there was a very high illiteracy percentage rate, between 40 and 55. So that was the case in Spain not so long ago. I have colleagues at university. Remember, we read a lot, and that is not true. Some of us read, and many of the things we read, well, I wish we hadn't done so, because there were terrific books about, horrible things, theoretical books about Marxism, and they were so dull, and they were absolutely foolish. So we were like, remember this enlightened armpit. So ridiculous. So I don't understand people that decide voluntarily to be always pessimistic. And I absolutely agree with Antonio. We emerged from a 40 years dictatorship. Nobody read, hardly everybody read. We left in darkness. My grandmother never learned to read and write. So does my mother. She didn't develop the habit. And look at me, I went to university, I became a writer. I read more than live. And I have the feeling, just the opposite feeling, that is the country is evolving for the better. And I've met many younger people, younger than me, and especially artists. They have telephones that are not smartphones. They asked me to call them, to give them phone calls. They decided voluntarily to get rid of the internet. So there are people there. They are part of a completely different clockwork, and that will lead us to a completely different. That will usher a new area. A new world is coming. What's the point of being pessimistic? There is a great film by Louis Malle called Atlantic City. The main character is played by Burt Lancaster. He's a gangster. He's always nostalgic. And Susan Sarandon is much younger than him, the female character. He continuously tells her how nice the world was when he was young, and they are just walking, strolling on Atlantic City. And at one time, Burt Lancaster tells her, "You should have seen the Atlantic Ocean." So that was a real Atlantic in the 40s. So of course it's exactly the same ocean and the same sea. When I was young.
There's another question over there.
Hola. Soy yo.
Yes, it's me. I was really expecting this talk, and I just loved it. Even though it's siesta time, you know, you must all acknowledge that we've achieved this great achievement, that this is a great success. Well, I know that a writer writes with the greatest goodwill and with a lot of effort, and when you close your book, like when a painting goes on the wall, it stops belonging to you. I just wanted to highlight that there is a bit of that piece of work, that is not yours anymore. It's going to be interpreted by the readers. Yes, but it's like exactly what Antonio said. The book has told you things that you didn't even know you had. So it's a part of you that abandons you. It becomes autonomous, but it also, for yourself as the writer, it frees you off a load. It's a sort of a therapy, yes, but at the same time it interpolates you. The last book, it's a book I've been writing for 5 years. There are many things in my life in that book, even though it's apparently very fun and so on, and I really... It was only a year after that I completely understood everything the book was telling me, and it is part of me, but I also respect it very much because I think it's a book is something that others are going to interpret, but I myself also have to interpret it, and little by little. Yes, exactly, little by little, because I really needed a lot of time to recover from that and start writing again. It was something of a physical impact. It's just like giving birth to a person. Yes, of course, it's a part of you. And this idea of the non-belonging is a very good idea. Also to cure egocentrism, and sober people also need that. Yes. So in fact, what you've done, you've been lucky enough to be able to do that. And you will see that with time when you write books, and many years go past, and the book grows apart from you because you change, you evolve. Because, I published my first book 40 years ago, and 40 years ago I was someone completely different from who I am now. And I don't look at those books anymore now because I'm sort of embarrassed by them. I don't know, things that I don't like in those books. But when I see someone, a young girl or young boy who wasn't born when I wrote that book and I published that book, and they bring it for me to sign it for them, this brings peace to me because, now, of course, I have like remorse and I only see the mistakes and the defects in those older books. But in fact, this makes me understand that the book now belongs to that reader, and I'd like to tell that person, don't read that book. It's, it's an old book. It's not so good anymore. The new ones are better. But you, in fact, are not the one to appreciate the value of that book. It is up to the readers. Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon. We're talking about fear, about hate, about feelings and attitudes to the life we have to live at different moments. You've talked about how we are giving part of our privacy to big corporations, the social media. You're talking about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and so on. And all these, that is also related to individualization and the loss of collective identities and communities. From your position, what would be the space that is left to ethics? Well, I think it is a false collectivity of the the self. It's an individual, it's the sum of individual selves. There's no space for ethics there anymore. The idea of the self is beyond, above everything else. And it's difficult to find space for ethics there because it is a ferociously capitalist world where each of us is a product. When I studied journalism, there was a subject entitled "When something is free, the product is you." You go into Instagram and you are the product. You generate the content that allows for these people to have a greater number of people going into Instagram. This is a traffic that brings money to them. So it's summing up products where the ethics is the ethics of capitalism, and the idea is that there's one person above someone else because according to the number of likes and things like that. But there should be some way of controlling this. I believe there's no ethics at all, only individual ethics that are not seen in the environment, because the only ethics is the rules of the system. If the system allows you to insult or not, then also to which extent and so on. It is the system that will decide whether it is an insult or not. So no ethics. Simone Wells and l'enracinement. She says that, well, they're talking a lot about human rights, and she defines the book as a catalogue of duties towards human beings, and that's the ethics of fraternity, the duties towards other human beings. So the system in which we live turns you into a customer instead of being a citizen. You're a customer. And the traces of the abuse or the exploitation implied by the products you receive immediately are all those traces are deleted immediately. Now when I see all the delivery men in Madrid, for example, all these young people from other countries, this modern society, is it this the only thing we can offer them? There's, the monstrosity of a customer that at 2 a.m. is going to deliver something that is required immediately. Otherwise, if the delivery is not immediate, then that person is expelled because that person will receive not enough stars, and it is the algorithm that is expelling that delivery man. In the Amazon storing warehouses, many of the elderly workers there, they are wearing, they cannot go to the toilet, they are monitored constantly, and they are wearing diapers, nappies, to be able to work and not go to the toilet, because otherwise the algorithm will dismiss them immediately. Also, when you buy a mobile phone and it breaks, you just throw it away, and you don't think about Congo mines, cobalt mines, where slave children are the ones who are extracting the cobalt. And that's what we need to look at, right? That's what needs to be seen. The T-shirt you just bought for a few euros. This was the origin of the poisoning of a stream of fresh water in Bangladesh, and that's the world in which we live. So what is the space left for ethics? Well, we just have to try and be as decent as possible in our everyday behavior. That's our only choice. Most of us who are here are readers. We are passionate about books, and libraries are now full of books, and that's great, because for elderly people like me who love reading, it's great because we don't have to buy books. And what about you, the writers? Is it good or bad for you? This book by Camille, I got it from the library. I was, well, at home no one read, so there were no books, and no one had money for books. It was not they were not considered important, so no one bought them. And libraries saved my life. I deeply love them. And whenever someone says that they're interested in reading one of my books, I say they can go and get one from the library. I invite them to go there. For me, these are shelters, they're homes, everything's there. And also libraries buy books, right? And for me, like Laura said, the heart of literature is our public schools and public libraries. When I was 11, there were no books at home. And then I was told there was a place where you could go and read books. And I was crazy about that. You could read whatever you can. You know, you can read everything you can. You could take all those books home. And I just couldn't believe it was free or it was belonged to everyone. It's an incredible experience of sharing. When my children were little, I went to get the library card from the district library, and it was difficult to explain to them because some of the things that are noble are difficult to explain, because this is your book, okay, but you cannot keep it, and you must be careful with it, so it's not that, because you'll have to bring it back to the library for someone else to read it later on. And there's so much to explore. It's a school of citizenship. It is yours, but it is also everybody else's. Is the opposite of what we're talking about right now. No, this idea of this is mine. Don't get it. Don't rob it from me. It's mine. First of all, during lockdown, people read much more. Couldn't we have a sort of a lockdown for a month to, to take some time off this frenzy rhythm we have? Thank you very much for your wonderful conversation. It's been a pleasure. We don't have conversations as often as we should. And within this framework of neither fear nor hate, and there's a piece of data from Nature. It says that 60% of gases, greenhouse effect gases, are produced by the 10% who are richer in humankind, and we're part of this too. And there's 1% of people who explode. Everybody else, they pollute 50% of greenhouse, with 50% of greenhouse gas emissions. Recently, I read information about the superjets. This is a fascinating information. And superjets, I don't know how many there might exist in the world, but not that many. All superjets together, their carbon print is bigger than that of whole countries. I wrote an article about the superjet by Jeff Bezos, someone we all make rich together, the one from Amazon. And he built a superjet in Rotterdam, in the shipyards, and it was so big that when it was built, they couldn't get the jets out of the shipyard because there was a bridge, and they were thinking about bringing the bridge down so that it could get out of the shipyard. And I thought, well, at least one of those taps, the taps in the jet was paid by me. Well, humbly, very humbly, I don't know, I might have paid a screw or something like that. Mea culpa. Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias a los dos.
Thank you to you both.
Bueno,
Thank you for your humanity and for this consciousness of this need of the private freedom or freedom of intimacy. Thank you very much, and now we are going to get ready for the next conversation.